My son-in-law made a joke about me in Arabic during a family dinner. I just smiled politely, then I responded in perfect Arabic. His family went silent. The invitation to dinner had come from my daughter Sarah, 3 days earlier. Her voice on the phone carried that breathless quality it had maintained since she met Zane 6 months ago. A mixture of excitement and anxiety that reminded me of her childhood anticipation before Christmas mornings. "Mum, it's time you properly meet Zane's parents. They're joining us via video call from Amman," she explained. "Emily will be there too. I know it's last minute, but they're eager to meet you before the wedding." The wedding? 2 simple words that had been causing me sleepless nights since Sarah announced her engagement after knowing Zane for only 4 months. At 65, I had seen enough of the world to know when something felt rushed, when pieces didn't quite fit together. But I had also learned when to voice concerns and when to observe silently. This situation called for the latter approach. "Of course, darling." "I'd be delighted," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself. Zane is making traditional Jordanian food. Isn't that sweet?" Sweet wasn't the word I would have chosen. Calculated, perhaps, but I kept that thought to myself. I arrived at Sarah's condo in Yorkville precisely at 6:30 p.m., dressed in a simple but elegant navy dress, a habit from my executive days that never quite left me. The decade I spent in Dubai as a senior executive for Gulfstream Petroleum had taught me the importance of subtle presentation. Not flashy enough to draw undue attention, but polished enough to command respect. If you're watching, subscribe and tell me in the comments what time you're listening. Emily, my younger daughter, opened the door before I could knock. Her face was a mixture of relief and tension. "Thank God you're here," she whispered, giving me a quick, tight hug. "This whole thing feels like a stage production." I squeezed her hand reassuringly. Emily had always been the pragmatic one, the lawyer who could spot inconsistencies in a contract from a mile away. That she shared my unease about this relationship was both comforting and concerning. The condo was filled with fragrant aromas, undeniably authentic Middle Eastern cuisine. I recognized the distinct scent of sumac and cardamom, familiar companions during my years in Dubai. For a moment, I was transported back to business dinners in luxurious restaurants overlooking the Persian Gulf. Sarah rushed forward to greet me, her face flushed with either cooking heat or nervous energy, perhaps both. Behind her stood Zane, tall and undeniably handsome, with an easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Eleanor, welcome," he said, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. "I hope you're hungry. I've prepared some traditional dishes from home." I noted the slight emphasis on "I've prepared," wondering if he really expected me to believe he'd cooked this elaborate spread himself. During my time in the Middle East, I'd learned that many traditional dishes require days of preparation and generations of knowledge. The perfectly formed kibbeh on the counter told me this meal had come from professional hands, probably from one of the excellent places on Lawrence Avenue. "It smells wonderful," I replied truthfully. "Reminds me of a wonderful restaurant near my condo in Jumeirah." A flicker of surprise crossed Zane's face, quickly masked. "Ah, yes. You mentioned you spent some time in Dubai. A year or 2, wasn't it?" I smiled, not correcting his deliberate diminishment of my decade abroad. "Something like that." The laptop was already set up at the end of the dining table, positioned so that everyone could be seen. On screen, a handsome, middle-aged couple waited, the backdrop of their home suggesting faded elegance. I recognized quality furnishings chosen long ago, now slightly worn around the edges. "Mama, Baba, this is Sarah's mother, Eleanor." Zane introduced me in English, gesturing toward the screen. Khalid and Amira Hakim nodded politely, both offering greetings in heavily accented English. "Such pleasure to meet mother of beautiful Sarah," Amira said, her practiced smile revealing expensive dental work. "We very happy for wedding soon." "The pleasure is mine," I responded. "I've been looking forward to meeting you both." As we settled around the table, I observed the dynamic quietly. Zane positioned himself as the bridge between our families, translating comments back and forth while controlling the flow of conversation. Sarah beamed at him adoringly each time he translated something, apparently impressed by his cultural dexterity. "My parents say they're impressed by Sarah's academic achievements," he translated after a rapid exchange in Arabic. What his father had actually said was closer to, "At least she has some status at her university," to compensate for her plain looks. I maintained my pleasant expression, watching, waiting. Throughout the appetizers, I noted how Zane carefully curated every exchange, ensuring that Sarah heard only compliments and enthusiasm from his parents. Emily, ever observant, kept shooting me glances that confirmed she sensed something was off, though she couldn't pinpoint what. When Sarah mentioned her late father's technology patents, the ones from his time in Waterloo that had secured our family's financial comfort, I watched Khalid's eyes sharpen with interest on screen. What followed was a rapid exchange in Arabic between father and son that Zane translated as, "My father is impressed by your father's innovation. He was an inventor himself." The actual exchange had been, "She inherited directly? How much?" "Millions. The mother controls some of it, but Sarah has her own trust." "Excellent. This is even better than we hoped." The dinner progressed, and with each passing course, I catalogued the discrepancies between what was actually said and what was translated for my daughters. I noted the subtle signs of Zane's deception, the slight tells I'd learned to recognize during high-stakes oil negotiations with men who assumed I couldn't possibly understand their sidebar conversations in Arabic. When Sarah and Emily left to bring dessert from the kitchen, Zane relaxed visibly, switching fully to Arabic with his parents. "2 more months until the wedding, just before my visa expires," he said, loosening his ties slightly. "Perfect timing." "And you're sure about this one?" his father asked, glancing toward the kitchen. "What about the senator's daughter you mentioned?" "Melissa? She's still an option if something goes wrong here. But Sarah is better. More money. Easier to handle. Plus, her father is dead, and her mother is just a typical clueless Canadian woman. Sarah never mentioned that her mother spent any significant time in Dubai. Probably just a vacation she likes to brag about." His mother leaned forward, her voice lowered despite the digital connection. "Remember, you only need to stay married long enough to secure your permanent residency. Then you can bring us over, and we can rebuild what your father lost." I took a sip of water, maintaining my pleasant, slightly vacant expression of someone who couldn't possibly follow the conversation. Inside, however, I was calculating my next move with the precision that had made me successful in a male-dominated industry for decades. Sarah and Emily returned with a tray of baklava store-bought, though Zane had claimed it was his grandmother's recipe. As my daughter set the plates down, beaming with pride at this cultural fusion of our families, I knew it was time to protect her from what I'd discovered. I just needed the perfect moment. The perfect moment arrived with the coffee. Sarah had prepared it the Canadian way, in a drip machine, rather than the thick Arabic brew that would have been traditional. I noticed Zane's slight grimace as she served it, though he quickly masked his disdain with a compliment about its aroma. His parents, visible on the laptop screen, exchanged knowing glances. "I apologize for the coffee," Sarah said, her eagerness to please evident in her voice. "I know it's not prepared the traditional way." "It's perfect, Habibi," Zane assured her, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder. "My parents don't mind." He turned to the screen and spoke in Arabic. "Canadians have no idea how to make proper coffee. Just another thing I'll have to tolerate until I get what I need." His parents laughed, and his father responded in Arabic. "Just 2 more months of pretending, son. Think of the PR card and the money. Remember your cousin Faird? He divorced his Canadian wife just 6 months after getting his papers." "Yes, but he didn't marry into money," Zane replied with a smirk. "I'm being much more strategic." Emily, always perceptive, sensed the disconnect between the laughter on screen and what Zane claimed to be translating. "What did they say that was so funny?" she asked. "Oh, just that in Jordan we drink coffee so strong you could stand a spoon in it," Zane improvised smoothly. "Cultural differences, you know." I took a deliberate sip of my coffee, noting its inadequacy with genuine regret. A proper Arabic coffee would have been the perfect accompaniment to what I was about to do. "Sarah, why don't you bring out those beautiful Demitas cups your grandmother left you?" I suggested, eager to make a good impression. "We can at least serve the coffee properly, even if it's not prepared traditionally." Sarah nodded and headed back to the kitchen, with Emily following to help. The moment my daughters left the room, Zane turned back to his parents, rolling his eyes. "She's trying so hard. It's almost too easy." "Has she mentioned anything about changing her will or adding you to her accounts?" his father asked, his voice taking on a business-like tone. "You should start working on that before the wedding." "I'm already ahead of you," Zane replied. "I mentioned how in our culture, Couples fully merge their finances as a sign of trust and commitment. She loved that romantic notion. "Good boy," his mother purred. "And what about the old woman? Will she cause problems?" Zane glanced in my direction, meeting my placid smile with a dismissive assessment. "Eleanor? No, she's harmless. Probably spent her life as a housewife. Mentioned Dubai once. Probably a weekend stopover on a cruise or something. She has no idea what's happening." I set my coffee cup down carefully on its saucer, the gentle clink drawing their attention. Then, in perfect Arabic, with the distinct Gulf dialect I had acquired during my years in Dubai, I responded. 10 years as a senior petroleum executive, negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts with sheikhs and ministers, taught me to recognize a con when I see one, Mr. Hakim. And right now, I'm looking at a family of con artists targeting my daughter. The effect was instantaneous and magnificent. Zane's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips, dark liquid sloshing over the rim and onto his crisp white shirt. On the screen, his father's mouth dropped open in undignified shock, while his mother clutched at her elaborately embroidered collar as if suddenly short of breath. You speak Arabic?" Zane finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "With considerable fluency," I confirmed, still in Arabic. "Enough to understand every word you've said about my daughter, about the senator's daughter, Melissa, about your impending visa expiry, and your plans to access Sarah's inheritance." The color had drained from Zane's face. His father recovered first, switching to rapid damage control mode. "Madam, you've misunderstood. This is a cultural misunderstanding. In our way of speaking." I cut him off with a gesture I'd perfected in boardrooms filled with men who thought they could talk over me. "Mr. Hakim, I spent a decade negotiating with some of the most skillful businessmen in the Middle East. I understand perfectly the difference between cultural nuance and outright deception." The sound of cupboard doors closing in the kitchen signaled my daughter's imminent return. Zane's eyes darted toward the hallway, calculating his options. "You have exactly 10 seconds to decide how we proceed," I informed him, switching to English. "Either you tell Sarah the truth, or I will. And my version will include every detail I've just heard." "You would break your daughter's heart?" he challenged, recovering some of his composure. "To save her future?" "Without hesitation," I replied. "The question is whether you'll allow her to hear it from you, with whatever spin you can manage, or from me, with the unvarnished truth." Sarah and Emily returned carrying a tray of delicate porcelain cups, their grandmother's pride. Sarah's face was alight with the pleasure of sharing this family heirloom. "These were Grandma's special occasion cups," she explained to the screen. "She brought them from England when she immigrated." The contrast between her genuine openness and what had just transpired made my heart ache. Emily, ever attuned to atmospheres, immediately sensed the tension. "Did we miss something?" she asked, her lawyer's instincts activated. Zane looked from me to his parents on the screen, then to Sarah's hopeful face. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the desperate scramble for a narrative that could salvage his plan. "Actually," he began, his voice strained, "there's something I need to explain." His mother interrupted in Arabic, her voice sharp with warning. "Zane, don't throw everything away. She's bluffing. She can't prove anything." I responded in the same language, my tone mild, but my meaning unmistakable. I recorded every word on my phone from the moment I sat down, a habit from my business days when dealing with untrustworthy partners. This wasn't strictly true. I hadn't actually recorded anything. But the bluff hit its mark. Amira Hakim fell silent, her expression thunderous. "Mom, what's going on?" Sarah asked, confusion, and the first hints of alarm clouding her features. "Are you speaking Arabic?" "Yes, dear, I am," I confirmed, not taking my eyes off Zane. "It seems your fiancé and I have discovered we share a language, though perhaps not the same values." Emily set down the cups with deliberate care, her posture shifting subtly into what I recognized as her courtroom stance. "I think," she said with quiet authority, "someone needs to start explaining. Now." Zane looked trapped, cornered between my knowledge, his parents' panicked signals, and my daughter's growing suspicion. The carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and he knew it. "Sarah," he began, his voice catching, "there are some things about me, about us, that I haven't been completely honest about." And so it began. the unraveling of 6 months of lies, constructed with such care, and now collapsing in the space of a single evening. As I watched my daughter's expression shift from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror, I felt no triumph, only a mother's sorrow for necessary pain and a quiet determination that had carried me through far more daunting challenges than exposing one calculating young man's deception. Some lessons came at a terrible cost, but as I had learned during my years abroad, sometimes the most valuable negotiations were the ones you walked away from. Zane's confession emerged in fragments, each admission dragged out under the weight of my steady gaze and Emily's incisive questioning. Like a skilled lawyer performing a cross-examination, my younger daughter dismantled his defenses methodically. "So, your student visa expires in 8 weeks?" Emily clarified, her voice controlled despite the anger I could see in the tightness around her eyes. "Yes, and the wedding is scheduled for 6 weeks from now." "That's just a coincidence," Zane insisted, though his credibility was evaporating with each exchange. On the screen, his parents had shifted from shock to damage control, interjecting in both Arabic and broken English. "Cultural misunderstanding," his father kept repeating. "In our country, practical matters and love go together." I maintained my silence, allowing Emily to lead this phase of the confrontation. Sarah sat beside her sister, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The joy that had animated her face throughout dinner had drained away, replaced by a stillness I recognized from when she was a child and had just learned some difficult truth about the world. "And Melissa?" Emily pressed, referencing the name I'd revealed, the senator's daughter. Zane's attempt at denial crumbled when I simply raised an eyebrow. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his carefully styled hair. "Melissa is just a friend," he tried. "A friend you're also romantically involved with as a backup plan," I interjected, breaking my silence. "Your words, not mine." "You have no proof of that," he challenged, a flash of the real Zane showing through the charming facade. I pulled out my phone, the same bluff that had worked on his parents now deployed against him. "Would you like me to play back the recording where you and your father discussed your options?" Sarah finally spoke, her voice small but surprisingly steady. "You don't need to play anything, Mum. I believe you." She turned to Zane, and I saw something harden in her expression. "What I don't understand is, why? Was any of it real? Any of it at all?" The raw vulnerability in her question pierced the tension in the room. For a moment, even Zane seemed affected, a flicker of genuine emotion crossing his face before his survival instincts reasserted themselves. "Of course it was real," he insisted, reaching for her hand. She pulled away. "Sarah, yes, I needed the visa situation solved, but I chose you because I felt something special." "You chose me because my father's patents left me financially comfortable," she corrected him, her academic precision with words now a weapon. "You just admitted it to your parents." On the screen, Amira Hakim intervened, her accented English more polished than she'd previously let on. "Sarah, darling, you must understand. In our culture, marriage is a practical arrangement between families. Love grows from security, from stability. Zane cares for you, but also wishes to secure his future. Is that so wrong?" Emily answered before Sarah could. "It's wrong when it's built on lies, Mrs. Hakim, when it involves hiding relationships with other women. When it includes plans to access someone's inheritance under false pretenses. You've misunderstood." Khalid began, but I cut him off, switching to Arabic. "I understood perfectly when you asked if Zane had convinced Sarah to change her will yet. When you referenced your cousin Ferd, who divorced his Canadian wife 6 months after getting his PR card. When you called my daughter plain but said her money compensated for it, I maintained eye contact through the screen. I understood every word, Mr. Hakim, because I negotiated oil contracts worth billions with men who, like you, assumed I couldn't possibly understand their sidebar conversations." The stunned silence that followed gave Sarah time to process. I watched emotions cascade across her face, betrayal, humiliation, anger, before settling into something I recognized from looking in the mirror during my hardest days in Dubai: dignity under fire. "I think you should leave," she said to Zane, her voice quiet but firm. "Sarah, please." Now. The word held no room for negotiation. "At least let me explain properly," he pleaded, casting a venomous glance my way. "Your mother has turned this into something ugly. We could have worked through this." Sarah stood, physically creating distance between them. My mother simply revealed the truth you were hiding. That's not ugly, Zane, it's clarifying. Think about what you're throwing away, he tried, desperation edging into his tone. We had plans, a future. You had plans, she corrected. For my money, for your visa, for how long you needed to stay married before bringing your family over and accessing everything you could. Those weren't our plans. Those were yours. Emily had silently moved to stand beside her sister, a united front. I remained seated, allowing my daughters their moment of solidarity. On screen, the Hakims continued their attempts at damage control, now speaking rapidly among themselves in Arabic. They're discussing whether there's any way to salvage this, I translated for my daughters. His father is suggesting he apologize, say he developed real feelings over time. His mother thinks you might still be convinced if he emphasizes cultural differences in how marriages are approached. Zane shot me a look of pure hatred. All pretense abandoned. You had no right to interfere. I had every right, I replied calmly. I'm her mother. A meddling old woman who couldn't bear to see her daughter happy with someone from a different culture. He spat, his charm replaced by ugliness. No, I corrected him. A woman who learned to recognize predators during decades in business. Your cultural background is irrelevant to your character, Zane. I've known honorable men from Jordan, dishonest men from Canada, and every combination in between. You're not a representative of Arab culture. You're simply a con artist who chose the wrong mark. Sarah walked to the laptop and addressed her almost-in-laws with remarkable composure. Mr. and Mrs. Hakim, I'm sorry we won't be meeting in person after all. I'm ending my engagement to your son effective immediately. Please don't contact me again. Without waiting for a response, she closed the laptop, cutting off their protests mid-sentence. Turning to Zane, she removed the diamond engagement ring from her finger and placed it on the table between them. I believe this belongs to you. Or perhaps to Melissa, if she's still an option for your strategic future. The coldness in her voice made me ache for her. This controlled anger would eventually give way to pain, and I knew from experience that the crash would be devastating. But for now, her dignity was intact, and I felt a surge of pride beneath my concern. Zane made one final attempt, his tone shifting to threatening. You have no idea what you're doing. I have texts, emails, where you promised to help with my visa situation. I could make things very difficult. That sounds remarkably like attempted blackmail, Emily interrupted, the lawyer in her fully present, which, as I'm sure you know, is a serious criminal code offense. Would you like to continue that sentence? I'm recording for clarity. She held up her phone, and this time it wasn't a bluff. Defeated, Zane gathered his jacket. At the door, he turned back, his expression bitter. You'll regret this, Sarah. We could have had something real. The only thing I regret, she replied, is not listening to my instincts 6 months ago. Goodbye, Zane. After the door closed behind him, the apartment fell into silence. The elaborate dinner sat half-eaten on the table, the celebratory atmosphere entirely evaporated. Sarah remained standing, her posture rigid, as if the slightest movement might shatter her composure. Sit down, darling, I said gently. I'll make us some proper coffee. As I moved to the kitchen, I heard the first sob break free, followed by Emily's murmured comfort. The sounds of my daughter's heartbreak followed me, each one a blade. But beneath the pain of witnessing her suffering was the certainty that tonight's revelations, however painful, had saved her from something far worse. Some wounds were necessary to prevent greater injury. I knew this from experience, both personal and professional. The healing would come later. For now, I would make Arabic coffee the way I had learned in Dubai, strong and sweet, a small comfort against the bitterness of disillusionment. The 3 Wilson women sat in Sarah's living room until nearly midnight, the remnants of the abandoned dinner still on the table behind us. I had made coffee the proper way, Arabic style, boiled 3 times with cardamom, served in small cups without handles. The familiar ritual had calmed me, and the strong, sweet brew seemed to ground Sarah as she processed the evening's revelations. I feel so stupid, she said for perhaps the 5th time, cradling her cup. How did I not see it? All the signs were there. Because he was very good at what he did, I replied. Con artists are effective precisely because they're believable. Emily, who had kicked off her heels and tucked her feet beneath her on the sofa, nodded in agreement. You're not the first smart woman to be deceived by a charming man, and you won't be the last." She reached over to squeeze her sister's hand. "Besides, it's not like he came with warning labels." "Maybe not, but the rush to get engaged after only 4 months should have been my first clue." Sarah's academic mind was now reasserting itself, analyzing her experience with the same critical rigor she applied to literature. And the way he kept pushing for a wedding date right before his visa expired. God, it's so obvious in retrospect. "Hindsight has perfect vision," I offered. "What matters is that you know the truth now, before legal entanglements made it worse." Sarah looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "How did you know, Mum? I mean, aside from understanding Arabic, which, by the way, we are definitely discussing later, but even before tonight you seemed reserved about him. What did you see that I missed?" I considered my answer carefully. This wasn't the moment for "I told you so" or parental superiority. My daughter needed understanding, not judgment. "Small inconsistencies," I finally said. The way his stories about his family's background shifted slightly each time he told them. How he claimed to have attended prestigious schools but seemed unfamiliar with details a genuine alumnus would know. The fact that he never introduced you to any personal friends, only professional colleagues. I sipped my coffee before continuing. In Dubai, I learned to watch for disconnects between what people said and the evidence before me. When you're negotiating deals worth millions, you develop an eye for deception. "Millions?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "I knew you were an executive, but you've never really talked about the scale of your work there." I smiled slightly. "There's a lot I haven't shared about those years. It never seemed relevant once I returned to Canada." "Well, it's relevant now," Sarah said, a hint of her usual spirit returning. "Apparently, my mother is some kind of international woman of mystery with hidden language skills and a background in corporate espionage." "Hardly espionage," I corrected, though I was encouraged by her attempt at humor. "Just business conducted in a part of the world where being underestimated was sometimes an advantage. Men spoke freely around the Canadian woman they assumed couldn't understand them. I learned to use that." Emily leaned forward, her lawyer's curiosity piqued. "So for 10 years, you were essentially living a double life, pretending not to understand when you actually caught everything?" "Not always," I clarified. "In formal meetings, I used translators to maintain the official record. But yes, there were many situations where allowing people to believe I was linguistically ignorant gave me an edge." "Like tonight," Sarah said quietly. "Like tonight," I agreed. A contemplative silence fell between us, broken only when Emily stood to clear the coffee cups. "I still can't believe he was juggling you and the senator's daughter simultaneously. The sheer audacity." "I wonder if she knows," Sarah mused, her academic's curiosity momentarily overriding her personal hurt. "If she's another victim, or if she's in on it somehow." "That's not your problem," Emily said firmly, ever the pragmatist. "Your only job right now is to take care of yourself and legally extricate from this mess, starting with changing your locks first thing tomorrow." Sarah nodded, then turned to me with fresh tears forming. "How do I tell people?" "The department at U of T already planned an engagement party. My students know. It's so humiliating." I moved to sit beside her, putting my arm around shoulders that suddenly seemed too fragile to bear this weight. "You tell them the truth, simply and without shame. The engagement has been called off due to irreconcilable differences. Anyone who needs more detail than that isn't a true friend." "Your mother's right," Emily added, returning from the kitchen, "and anyone who judges you for being deceived isn't worth your time." Sarah leaned her head against my shoulder in a gesture so reminiscent of her childhood that my heart contracted. "I just keep thinking about what might have happened if Mum hadn't understood Arabic. If the wedding had gone forward." "But it didn't," I reminded her gently. "And it won't. Thanks to Wonder Woman here," Emily said, gesturing toward me with a half-smile. "Seriously, Mum, you were terrifying tonight. I've never seen you like that." I hadn't accessed that part of myself in years, the executive who could silence a room full of argumentative men with a precisely worded observation, the negotiator who could detect a bluff across cultural and linguistic divides. That version of Eleanor Wilson had been packed away with my corporate wardrobe when I returned to Canada after John's death, retired alongside the career that had shaped half my adult life. "I'm still the same person," I said with a slight shrug, "just with dimensions you haven't needed to see before." "Well, I'm seeing them now," Sarah said, straightening up and wiping her eyes. And I have about 1,000 questions about your life in Dubai that you've apparently been keeping secret all these years. Not secret, I corrected, just compartmentalized. Your father knew everything, of course, but after he died and I moved back, it seemed simpler to focus on the present rather than dwell on the past. Emily returned to her seat, tucking her legs beneath her again. I think we've established that simple isn't always better. I want to know everything now. Starting with how you learned Arabic well enough to completely derail a con man's plans in real time. Despite the emotional exhaustion of the evening, I found myself smiling at my daughter's renewed curiosity about my life. Perhaps some good might come from tonight's pain after all. A new openness between us. A recognition that we still had much to learn about one another, even after decades of family life. It's a long story, I warned them, and it's getting late. I'm not sleeping anyway, Sarah said with a hollow laugh. Might as well hear about Mum's secret double life as an international oil executive, complete with language skills and intimidation tactics, Emily added, her expression lighter than it had been all evening. I settled back against the cushions, considering where to begin. How to unpack a decade of experiences I had kept neatly contained since my return to Canadian life, the corporate battles, the cultural adaptations, the friendships and rivalries, the mistakes and triumphs that had shaped me into someone who could recognize a man like Zayn for exactly what he was. It began with a 3-month assignment that turned into 10 years, I started. I was 48. Your father had just received his first major patent payout, and Gulfstream Petroleum offered me a position that seemed too good to refuse. As I spoke, I watched something shift in my daughter's expressions. A new awareness dawning as they began to see their mother, not just as a parent, but as a woman with a life and identity entirely separate from her maternal role. It was, I realized, a gift that had emerged from the evening's devastation. This opportunity for genuine recognition across the generational divide. Tomorrow would bring practical concerns, changing locks, canceling wedding arrangements, managing the social fallout of a broken engagement. But tonight, as Sarah's tears gradually gave way to genuine interest in my story, I glimpsed the resilience that would eventually help her heal. She was, after all, my daughter. Stronger than even she knew. 2 days after the disastrous dinner, I was at Sarah's condo helping her sort through the numerous wedding gifts that needed to be returned. Emily had taken the day off work to join us, armed with a spreadsheet and shipping labels. The practical task of dismantling what should have been a joyous occasion felt both necessary and cruel. I still can't believe Mrs. Abernathy from your department gave you a hand-embroidered tablecloth, Emily remarked, carefully rewrapping the delicate item. Do people even use these anymore? Sarah managed a weak smile. She spent 6 months making it, said she's done one for every faculty bride since 1985. Well, that makes the awkward conversation you need to have with her slightly more difficult, Emily said, updating her spreadsheet. I was about to suggest a particular wording for the inevitable explanations when Sarah's doorbell rang. The three of us froze, exchanging glances. Are you expecting anyone? I asked. Sarah shook her head, tension returning to her shoulders. It might be Zayn. He's called 17 times since the other night. I've blocked his number, but he might have decided to show up in person. I'll handle it, Emily said, her tone shifting to what I recognized as her courtroom voice. She strode to the door with confident purpose, peering through the peephole. The transformation in her posture was immediate and alarming. It's not Zayn, she said, turning back to us with widened eyes. It's his parents. Sarah paled visibly. What? Why would they? We don't have to find out, I interjected, moving to stand beside Emily. We don't owe them any conversation. The doorbell rang again, followed by a woman's voice, calling Sarah's name with practiced politeness. I want to hear what they have to say, Sarah decided, her academic curiosity apparently overriding her emotional self-preservation. Maybe they're here to apologize. Emily and I exchanged skeptical glances, but stepped aside as Sarah moved to open the door. There stood Khalid and Amira Hakim, impeccably dressed as if for a business meeting rather than a transatlantic social call. Amira clutched an expensive-looking handbag, while Khalid held a small gift box tied with ribbon. Sarah, darling, Amira began, her accent noticeably less pronounced than during our video call. We had to come in person. May we please come in for just a few minutes? Sarah hesitated, then stepped back to allow them entry. I noted how their eyes swept the condo, taking in details they hadn't been able to see through the limited frame of a video call. Their gazes lingered briefly on the pile of wedding gifts before returning to Sarah with practiced smiles. "We were so distressed by the unfortunate misunderstanding," Khaled began, once we had all moved to the living room. "No one Saturday. This would not be a comfortable extended visit. We flew in immediately to clear things up." "Misunderstanding?" Emily echoed incredulously. "I think the situation was perfectly clear." Amira turned to me, her expression a masterpiece of dignified appeal. "Mrs. Wilson, Eleanor, as one mature woman to another, surely you understand how cultural differences can create confusion. In our tradition, marriages have always involved practical considerations alongside emotional ones." "I understand cultural differences quite well, Mrs. Hakim," I replied evenly. "I also understand the difference between cultural practices and deliberate deception. Your son was engaged to my daughter while simultaneously pursuing another woman, all while planning to use marriage primarily as an immigration strategy. That transcends cultural differences." Khaled cleared his throat, shifting tactics. "We want to assure you that despite what you may have overheard, Zayn's feelings for Sarah are genuine. Yes, there were practical considerations about his visa, but that doesn't negate his affection." "If his feelings were genuine, why was he involved with Melissa simultaneously?" Sarah asked, her voice remarkably steady. "Why did he lie about so many aspects of his life and your family circumstances?" The Hakims exchanged a quick glance that told me they hadn't expected such direct questioning from Sarah, whom they had clearly underestimated. "Young men make mistakes," Amira offered, her tone shifting to maternal understanding. "This Melissa," she pursued him aggressively. Zayn was confused, "But he chose you, Sarah." "Actually," I interjected, "according to your conversation the other night, he was keeping his options open in case things went wrong with Sarah. That's not confusion, that's calculation." Khaled's expression hardened slightly, the affable facade cracking. He turned to address Sarah directly, ignoring Emily and me. "We understand you're hurt, but consider what you're throwing away. Zayn is educated, from a good family. This marriage would join our families across cultures. A beautiful thing in these divided times." "A beautiful thing built on lies," Sarah responded, gaining confidence with each exchange. "I'm curious. Why did you fly all the way here? What do you hope to achieve?" Another telling glance between the Hakims. Then Khaled produced the small box he had been holding. "A peace offering," he said, extending it toward Sarah. "A family heirloom that was to be your wedding gift. We still want you to have it, as a symbol of our sincere wish to move forward from this misunderstanding." Sarah didn't reach for the box. "Move forward how exactly?" Amira stepped in smoothly. "Perhaps you and Zayn could begin again. A longer engagement this time, with complete transparency. He is truly devastated by what happened." "I'm sure he is," Emily muttered. "Is Zayn's visa situation still a concern?" I asked directly, watching their expressions carefully. "That's a separate matter that can be addressed through proper channels," Khaled replied, too quickly. "This is about two young people who care for each other." The pieces suddenly aligned in my mind with the clarity I'd once applied to complex business negotiations. "You're not here to apologize," I said, the realization crystallizing. "You're here because without this marriage, your son has no path to remain in Canada legally. And without access to Sarah's inheritance, whatever financial problems your family is facing remain unsolved." Amira's smile tightened. "Mrs. Wilson, you're being unnecessarily harsh. We're simply trying to heal a rift between a con artist and his intended victim." I completed for her. "The answer is no. Sarah will not be reconnecting with Zayn, restarting your son's PR process, or providing financial support to your family. That chapter is closed. Sarah is an adult who can make her own decisions," Khaled responded, an edge entering his voice as he turned back to my daughter. "This gift was my grandmother's. In our culture, family treasures carry deep meaning. Please, at least accept this as a gesture of our sincerity." He extended the box again, and for a moment I feared Sarah might take it out of ingrained politeness. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and spoke with remarkable composure. "Mr. and Mrs. Hakim, I appreciate that you traveled a long way, but this conversation is pointless. I will not be reconciling with Zayn. I will not be accepting gifts from your family. And I would appreciate it if all of you would respect my wishes and stop contacting me. Khalid's pleasant mask slipped entirely, revealing the desperation beneath. You don't understand what's at stake. Our family's situation is not Sarah's responsibility, Emily interrupted firmly. I think it's time for you to leave. This isn't over, Amira said, her refined demeanor giving way to something harder as she switched to Arabic. That foolish boy has ruined everything with his carelessness. We needed this marriage. Then perhaps, I replied in the same language, you should have raised a son who understood that lasting relationships require honesty rather than manipulation. The shock on their faces at my continued demonstration of Arabic fluency might have been comical in other circumstances. Without another word, they turned and left, the gift box still clutched in Khalid's hand. When the door closed behind them, Sarah let out a long, shaky breath. Do you think they'll be back? Not if they're smart, Emily said grimly, but I'll file for a restraining order tomorrow, just to be safe. I put my arm around Sarah's shoulders, feeling both fierce pride in her strength and lingering concern for her vulnerability. You handled that beautifully. I almost took that box, she whispered. Out of habit, out of politeness, even after everything. But you didn't, I reminded her. You stood your ground. Like mother, like daughter, Emily observed with a small smile. Apparently the Wilson women are made of stronger stuff than the Hakims anticipated. A week after the Hakim's unwelcome visit, Sarah received a text message from an unknown number. She was at my house for our newly established Sunday dinner tradition, a practice we'd begun as a way to maintain close contact during her recovery from Zane's deception. Emily was running late, caught in traffic after visiting her boyfriend in Ottawa. Sarah stared at her phone, her expression shifting from surprise to concern. What is it? I asked, setting down the salad bowl I'd been preparing. It's from someone named Melissa Crawford, Sarah said, looking up with wide eyes. She says she needs to talk to me about Zane. She says it's important. Melissa, the senator's daughter. I moved to read over Sarah's shoulder. The message was brief but urgent. Sarah, my name is Melissa Crawford. I believe we have a mutual problem named Zane Hakim. I just found out about you and think we should talk. There are things you need to know that may affect your safety. Can we meet? It could be a trap, I cautioned, years of business negotiations having taught me to look for hidden angles. The Hakims might be trying another approach. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I considered that. But if she really is Senator Crawford's daughter, that's easy enough to verify. Her fingers flew across her phone screen. Look, this is her LinkedIn profile. She's legitimate, works at her father's nonprofit foundation, Harvard graduate, impressive resume. Still doesn't mean her intentions are honest, I pointed out. What if Zane put her up to this? Some kind of reconciliation ploy? Only one way to find out, Sarah replied with newfound determination. She had been growing stronger each day since the broken engagement, her academic's analytical mind helping her process the betrayal. I'll suggest meeting in a public place. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. That must be Emily, I said, moving to answer it. But when I opened the door, I found myself facing a young woman I had never seen before. Tall, elegantly dressed, with an air of confidence that spoke of privilege and education. Mrs. Wilson? She asked. I'm Melissa Crawford. I apologize for showing up unannounced, but I think we need to talk about Zane Hakim. I studied her carefully, noting details that suggested she was indeed who she claimed to be. The quality of her clothing, the subtle security presence in the form of a man waiting discreetly by a black SUV at the curb. Senators' daughters didn't typically travel without some form of protection. You have remarkable timing, Miss Crawford, I said, stepping aside to let her in. Sarah just received your text. Melissa's eyes widened slightly. I sent that less than 5 minutes ago. You're already together. Sunday dinner, I explained, leading her to the kitchen where Sarah stood, frozen in surprise. Sarah, it appears Melissa has decided a text message wasn't sufficient. The two women regarded each other with the careful assessment of rivals unexpectedly forced to cooperate. They were physical opposites, Sarah with her father's dark hair and academic bearing, Melissa, blonde and polished in a way that spoke of finishing schools and society pages. Thank you for seeing me, Melissa said, her poise impressive, despite the awkwardness of the situation. I know this must be strange. Very, Sarah agreed. I'm not sure what we have to discuss, though. My engagement to Zane is over. I know. That's partly why I'm here. Melissa glanced at me, then back to Sarah. I only found out about you 2 days ago. Zane and we've been dating for nearly 8 months. The timeline hung in the air between us. 8 months. Which meant their relationship had begun before Sarah even met him. I see, Sarah said, her voice carefully neutral. Please, sit down. As we settled at my kitchen table, I offered Melissa coffee, which she accepted with practiced graciousness. The social niceties seemed absurd given the circumstances, yet we clung to them like a familiar script in an otherwise unprecedented situation. How did you find out about me? Sarah asked once we were all seated. Pure chance, Melissa replied. I was at a fundraiser for my father's re-election campaign when I overheard 2 men from the Jordanian embassy discussing Zane's immigration problem. They mentioned his engagement in Toronto had fallen through and joked about how he'd need to accelerate things with me instead. Her composure cracked slightly. I confronted Zane afterward, and he admitted everything. I'm sorry, Sarah said, and I could tell she meant it. Whatever initial comparison or competition might have existed between them had dissolved in the face of their shared deception. Don't be, Melissa replied with unexpected firmness. I'm not here for sympathy or to compare notes on what an extraordinary liar Zane is. I'm here because I'm concerned about what he might do next. What do you mean? I asked, all my internal alarms activating. Melissa looked directly at me. After I confronted him, Zane became different. The charm disappeared. He was angry, desperate. Said he'd lost everything because of your family. She turned back to Sarah. He blamed your mother specifically. Said she'd turned you against him with lies. Not lies, Sarah corrected automatically. My mother simply revealed the truth. I know that now, Melissa agreed. But Zane doesn't see it that way, and a desperate man with an expiring visa and failed plans can be dangerous. I felt a cold certainty settle in my stomach. I'd seen that transformation before the moment when a negotiation failed and desperation replaced calculation. It rarely ended well. Has he threatened you? I asked. Not explicitly, Melissa said, her training in political nuance evident in her precise language. But he's become erratic, shows up at my apartment unannounced, calls at all hours. Alternates between begging me to marry him before his visa expires and making veiled comments about making everyone pay for his situation. Have you reported this to the police? Sarah asked, her concern now visibly shifting from her own hurt to this broader threat. Melissa gave a small, humorless laugh. My father's a senator in a re-election year. The last thing his campaign needs is a scandal involving his daughter and a foreign national in an immigration scheme. My family's preference is to handle this quietly. Which means, I prompted, my father has connections at IRCC. Zane's visa violation will be flagged, and he'll likely be deported within the week. She looked between us. I wanted to warn you because he knows where you both live. He's mentioned your addresses in his less controlled moments. The implication hung heavily in the room. Zane, cornered and desperate, might lash out before his impending deportation. Thank you for coming, I said, respecting her directness. We appreciate the warning. It's the least I could do, Melissa replied, a flash of vulnerability breaking through her polished exterior. We were both targeted by someone who saw us as means to an end. That creates a certain bond, doesn't it? Sarah nodded, reaching across the table to briefly touch the other woman's hand in a gesture of solidarity that transcended their differences. Yes, it does. As Melissa prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. There's one more thing you should know. Zane's family situation isn't what he claimed. They're not wealthy industrialists facing temporary setbacks. His father was involved in a financial scandal in Jordan embezzlement from government contracts. Most of their assets were seized years ago. This new piece of information completed the puzzle of the Hakim's desperate maneuvers, their visit, their insistence on reconciliation. All of it driven by a need more profound than just securing Zane's immigration status. How did you learn this? I asked. Melissa's smile was slight but genuine. Senator's daughter, remember? Background checks are standard procedure when I date someone. Her expression sobered. I just wish I'd looked more closely at the results. After she left, Sarah and I stood in silence, processing this unexpected development. The doorbell rang again, and this time it was Emily, apologizing for her lateness and completely unaware of the visitor who had just departed. "You missed quite a lot," Sarah told her sister as we moved back to the kitchen, including meeting the other woman, who turned out to be remarkably decent. "Wait, what?" Emily's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as we filled her in on Melissa's warning. "So now we have a potentially vindictive ex-fiancé with nothing to lose. Great. Just great." I watched my daughters discussing security measures and police contacts, noting how Sarah's academic passivity had been replaced by pragmatic alertness. Painful as this ordeal had been, it had awakened something in her, a recognition of her own strength and resilience that might never have emerged without this crucible. "We'll handle this," I assured them both, the certainty in my voice stemming from decades of managing crises far from home. Together. 3 days after Melissa's visit, I was at my home office reviewing investment documents when my phone chimed with a text from Sarah. "Someone's been in my condo. Things moved, not missing. Called police. They're on their way. Can you come?" My heart lurched as I grabbed my car keys, leaving the documents scattered across my desk. The drive to Sarah's condo in Yorkville typically took 20 minutes. I made it in 14, my hands gripping the steering wheel with the same controlled tension I'd once applied to high-stakes negotiations. 2 Toronto police cruisers were parked outside her building when I arrived. The doorman, who knew me by sight, waved me through with a concerned expression. "They're upstairs, Mrs. Wilson. Officers got here about 10 minutes ago." I thanked him and hurried to the elevator, my mind cycling through possibilities. A break-in with nothing stolen suggested something more disturbing than simple theft. Intimidation, perhaps, or someone searching for something specific. Given Melissa's warning, Zane seemed the obvious suspect. Sarah's door was ajar when I reached it. Inside, she sat on the sofa, speaking with a female police officer, while a male officer examined the locks on her balcony door. Emily was already there, standing with arms crossed, her lawyer's demeanor in full effect, as she questioned a third officer about security camera access. "Mum," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice as she rose to hug me. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "Of course," I replied, keeping an arm around her as I nodded to the officer. "I'm Eleanor Wilson, Sarah's mother." The officer introduced herself as Detective Rivera. "Your daughter was explaining that she has concerns about who might have entered her condo. A former fiancé?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Their engagement ended recently under difficult circumstances. He's facing visa expiration and potential deportation." Detective Rivera made a note. "Any specific threats made?" "Not directly to Sarah," I explained, "but we received information that he's been exhibiting concerning behavior and has mentioned making everyone pay for his situation." Sarah guided me through the condo, pointing out subtle disturbances that only a resident would notice. Books rearranged on shelves, cushions not quite as she'd left them, her laptop moved from her desk to the coffee table. "The strangest thing," she said, leading me to her bedroom, "is this." On her pillow lay a small jewelry box, tied with the same ribbon as the gift Khalid Hakim had tried to present during their visit. Inside was an ornate gold necklace with an Arabic calligraphy pendant. "It says remember," I translated, examining the piece carefully without touching it. "This wasn't here when you left?" "Definitely not," Sarah confirmed. "I was at the university all day giving final exams, came home around 4, and immediately noticed things felt off." Detective Rivera appeared in the doorway. "We'll need to take that as evidence," she said, nodding toward the necklace. "My colleague is checking if there's security footage from your building's hallway or elevator. In the meantime, is there somewhere you can stay tonight?" "I wouldn't recommend remaining here until we determine how the intruder gained access." "She'll stay with me," I said firmly, meeting Sarah's eyes for confirmation. She nodded gratefully. Emily joined us, her expression grim. "I've already spoken to a colleague about an emergency restraining order we can file first thing tomorrow morning." As Sarah packed an overnight bag, I stepped onto the balcony with Detective Rivera to discuss security options. Her condo was on the 8th floor, not easily accessible from outside, but not impossible either. "The locks seem intact," the detective noted. "No signs of forced entry anywhere. Either someone has a key, or Zane charmed his way in through the building staff." I completed the thought. "He can be very persuasive when he wants something." We were interrupted by a commotion from the hallway. A male voice was arguing with one of the officers stationed at the condo door. A voice I recognized immediately. "I need to see Sarah. I just heard someone broke into her condo. Is she all right?" "Sein." Sarah froze in the bedroom doorway, overnight bag clutched in her hands. Emily moved protectively to stand between her sister and the entrance. Detective Rivera stepped quickly back inside, hand moving to her weapon as she assessed the situation. Before any of us could react further, Zane pushed past the officer at the door, stopping short when he saw all of us gathered in the living room. His appearance was disheveled, a far cry from the polished academic who had so charmed my daughter. His eyes were bloodshot, his normally immaculate clothing wrinkled, as if he'd been wearing the same outfit for days. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "thank God you're all right. I came as soon as I heard." "Heard from whom?" Emily demanded. "How did you even know about this?" Zane's eyes darted between us, the calculation visible even through his agitated state. I was in the neighborhood, saw the police cars, asked the doorman what happened." "Sir, I need you to step back outside," Detective Rivera said firmly, positioning herself between Zane and the rest of us. "This is an active crime scene." "Crime scene?" Zane repeated, his expression shifting to practiced concern. "What happened? Was something taken?" "Nothing was taken," I said evenly, watching his reactions closely. "But something was left behind, a necklace, on Sarah's pillow." The momentary flicker in his eyes was all the confirmation I needed. The male officer who had been examining the balcony moved to flank Detective Rivera, both now focused intently on Zane. "I don't know anything about a necklace," he said, but the denial lacked conviction. "It's the same one your father tried to give me last week," Sarah said, finding her voice. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze was steady. "The family heirloom. Remember?" Zane swallowed visibly. What a strange coincidence. Perhaps my parents sent it as a peace offering. They were very upset about our misunderstanding. "There was no misunderstanding," Emily interjected sharply. "And breaking into someone's condo to leave gifts is stalking, not a peace offering." "Breaking in? I would never." Zane's indignation seemed genuine, but I had seen him perform convincingly before. "Sarah, you can't possibly think I would do something like that." "Sir," Detective Rivera cut in, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I need to see some identification, please." As Zane reluctantly produced his wallet, I moved closer to Sarah, placing a protective hand on her back. She was holding up remarkably well, but I could feel the tension radiating from her body. "Zane Hakim," the detective read from his ID. "And your current immigration status, sir?" The question hit its mark. Zane's facade cracked further, desperation seeping through. "My student visa is valid. Until next week. I'm exploring options to extend my stay." "Such as breaking into your ex-fiancé's condo to leave threatening messages?" Emily suggested coldly. "It wasn't threatening," Zane protested, his composure fully evaporating now. "It was a gift, a reminder of what we had, what we could still have if she would just listen to reason instead of her interfering mother." The venom with which he spat the last words, directed at me, revealed the true feelings beneath his charming exterior. Detective Rivera and her colleague exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation from a potential misunderstanding to something more sinister. "Mr. Hakim," Detective Rivera said, "I'd like you to come down to the station to answer some questions about your whereabouts today." "Am I being arrested?" he demanded, panic rising in his voice. "On what charges? I haven't done anything wrong. You can't. This will affect my immigration status." "At this point, sir, we're just asking you to assist with our investigation," the detective replied diplomatically, though her meaning was clear in the firm grip she maintained on his elbow. As the officers escorted Zane from the apartment, he looked back once, his eyes locking with mine. The hatred there was undisguised now, the sophisticated veneer completely stripped away. "This is all your fault," he said in Arabic, his voice low and intense. "If you had stayed out of it, everyone would have been happy." I responded in the same language, my tone even but resolute. "No, Zane, my daughter would not have been happy in a marriage built on lies. And neither would you, living constantly in fear of discovery." The shock on his face at this final reminder of my linguistic abilities might have been satisfying under different circumstances. As it was, I felt only a weary relief as the door closed behind him and the officers. Sarah sank onto the sofa, the strain of maintaining her composure finally taking its toll. "Do you think they'll keep him in custody?" "They'll certainly try," Emily said, her legal knowledge kicking in. "Break and enter at minimum, possibly stalking and intimidation. And if his visa situation is as precarious as we believe, the CBSA might put a hold on him." I sat beside Sarah, taking her trembling hands in mine. "This will be over soon," I promised, hoping it was true. "I should never have let him into my life," she whispered. "Into our lives. I'm so sorry, Mum." "Don't apologize for his actions," I told her firmly. "You did nothing wrong except trust someone who didn't deserve it. We've all done that at some point." As we gathered Sarah's things to leave, I found myself reflecting on the irony of the situation. Zane had targeted Sarah in part because he believed her mother was a simple Canadian widow who would pose no obstacle to his plans. His miscalculation couldn't have been more complete. In trying to exploit what he perceived as our weakness, he had instead awakened a strength in both of us. My protective instincts, honed through years of international business, and Sarah's resilience, which grew more evident with each challenge she faced. The necklace's message had been "remember." But what Zane failed to understand was exactly what we would remember from this ordeal, not his manipulation, but our own capacity to overcome it. The weekend after Zane's arrest passed in a blur of police statements, visits to the Crown Attorney's office, and quiet evenings with Sarah in my guest bedroom. She slept fitfully, the betrayal and intrusion still fresh wounds, but each morning, she arose with greater resolve. I recognized the pattern from my own life's challenges, the gradual transition from victim to survivor. On Monday morning, Emily arrived at my house before her office hours, bearing case files and determination. "I've got news," she announced, accepting the coffee I offered. "Multiple developments, actually." Sarah joined us at the kitchen table, wrapped in the oversized cardigan that had become her comfort garment. "Good news or bad news?" "Mixed," Emily replied with the measured tone she used for legal matters. "First, Zane is still in custody. The break-and-enter charges might not stick since there's no evidence of forced entry, but they found items from your condo in his possession." "What items?" I asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing significant. A book from your shelf, a refrigerator magnet, a hair clip. Trophy items," Emily explained. "Common in stocking cases. He was building a collection." Sarah shuddered visibly. "That's disturbing." "It is," Emily agreed, "but it helps our case for the restraining order, which has been granted, by the way. More importantly, the CBSA has placed a hold on him due to visa fraud concerns." "Visa fraud?" I questioned. Emily nodded, a hint of satisfaction in her expression. "Apparently, he misrepresented information on his last visa extension. His academic credentials weren't quite what he claimed. The university has also launched an investigation into his doctoral research, which seems to contain significant plagiarism. His entire life was a fabrication," Sarah said quietly. "I wonder if anything he told me was true." "One thing certainly wasn't," Emily continued, opening one of her files. "Remember how he claimed his family had temporary financial troubles? I had a colleague with international connections look into the Hakims. She passed a document across the table. Their financial problems aren't temporary. Khalid Hakim was involved in a major embezzlement scandal 5 years ago. Most of their assets were seized." "Melissa mentioned something similar," I recalled. "So, their desperation for Zane to secure his PR and access to Sarah's inheritance makes more sense now." Sarah skimmed the document, her academic training evident in how quickly she absorbed the information. This explains why they were so persistent, even after I broke the engagement. They weren't just saving Zane's immigration status, they were trying to salvage their family's financial future. "At your expense," Emily added pointedly. A knock at my front door interrupted our discussion. Through the window, I glimpsed a black SUV parked at the curb, similar to the one that had accompanied Melissa Crawford during her visit. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Melissa who stood on my porch. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Senator James Crawford." The distinguished man extended his hand with the practiced ease of a career politician. "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but I was hoping to speak with you and your daughter about a sensitive matter." I assessed him quickly. Impeccable suit, security detail waiting discreetly by the vehicle, the confident bearing of someone accustomed to power. Every instinct from my business days activated, preparing for an unexpected negotiation. "Please come in, Senator," I replied, matching his professional courtesy. "We were just discussing recent developments." Sarah and Emily stood as we entered the kitchen, both clearly recognizing our visitor from news coverage. The senator greeted them with the smooth charm that had likely won him multiple elections before turning back to me. "I'll be direct, Mrs. Wilson. This situation with Zain Hakim has the potential to become complicated for everyone involved. I'd like to discuss how we might resolve it with minimal public attention." "You mean how to keep your daughter's name out of a potential scandal?" Emily interpreted, her lawyer's directness cutting through the diplomatic language. The senator didn't flinch. "Partly, yes. Melissa's involvement with this young man was unfortunate, and I'd prefer it not become fodder for my political opponents. But I'm also here out of genuine concern for your daughter, Miss Wilson." He turned to Sarah. "Melissa has told me about your ordeal. I'm truly sorry for what you've experienced." "Thank you," Sarah replied cautiously, "but I'm not sure what you're proposing, Senator." "I have certain influence with immigration authorities," he explained, settling into the chair I offered. "I believe the most expedient resolution would be Mr. Hakim's prompt deportation. He faces the charges here, but then is removed from the country before this becomes a protracted legal battle that draws unwanted attention to all parties." "You want to make him disappear?" Emily summarized, her tone making clear her professional assessment of this approach. "I want to ensure he can't harm your sister or my daughter further," the senator corrected smoothly. "I believe our interests align in this matter." I studied him carefully, recognizing the tactical approach. During my years in Dubai, I dealt with many powerful men who presented self-interest as mutual benefit. But in this case, he wasn't entirely wrong. "What exactly are you offering, Senator?" I asked directly. "My office can ensure that IRCC prioritizes his case. He'll be processed quickly, deported within the week, and banned from returning to Canada. The stalking and break and enter charges would remain on his record, but would be handled administratively rather than through public court proceedings." "And in exchange?" Emily pressed, ever the thorough lawyer. "Discretion," he replied simply. "This remains a private matter, not a public spectacle. No press, no social media, no interviews about foreign nationals targeting Canadian women for immigration advantages." The subtext was clear. His daughter's name, and by extension, his political reputation, would remain untarnished by association with Zain's schemes. I glanced at Sarah, wanting her to make this decision. "I have no interest in publicity," she said after a moment. "I just want this to be over and to feel safe in my own home again." The senator nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I'll make the necessary calls today. You should receive updates from the Crown Attorney's office by tomorrow." As our unexpected visitor prepared to leave, he paused, his political persona briefly giving way to something more genuine. "My daughter speaks highly of you both. She said you treated her with remarkable grace, considering the circumstances." He cleared his throat, perhaps uncomfortable with the personal nature of this admission. "Melissa has always had everything money can buy, but genuine connection isn't something I can purchase for her. Your kindness meant a great deal." After the senator departed, the three of us sat in thoughtful silence, processing this new development. "Well," Emily said finally, "I guess that's what happens when you have a Canadian senator in your corner. Problems just disappear." "Is it wrong that I'm relieved?" Sarah asked, a hint of guilt in her voice. "I know the justice system should run its course, but the thought of a prolonged legal battle, of having to face Zain in court—" "It's not wrong," I assured her. "Justice takes many forms. If this resolution gives you peace and ensures your safety, that's what matters most." "Besides," Emily added practically, "he's still facing consequences. Deportation and a permanent ban from Canada aren't exactly getting away scotangent-free." Sarah nodded, then turned to me with sudden curiosity. "Mum, you didn't seem surprised or intimidated by the senator at all. Most people would be at least a little flustered having a powerful politician show up at their door." I smiled, memories of far more intimidating negotiations rising unbidden. After negotiating oil contracts with Saudi ministers and Emirati sheikhs, a Canadian senator seems relatively straightforward by comparison. "There it is again. This whole other life you led that we know almost nothing about," Emily said, leaning forward. "I think it's time you told us everything. Not just the highlights you've shared since this all began, but the full story." Everything? I echoed, considering the decade of experiences I had compartmentalized since returning to Canada. That would take more than a morning conversation. We have time, Sarah said, a new determination in her voice. I want to understand who you really are, Mum. Beyond just being my mother, I want to know about the woman who faced down oil ministers and learned Arabic, and apparently can hold her own with Canadian senators without breaking a sweat. Looking at my daughters Emily with her analytical mind and protective instincts, Sarah with her emerging resilience, I realized how much they had changed through this ordeal, how much we all had changed. The masks we wore, the roles we played for each other, had been stripped away by crisis, revealing deeper truths about who we truly were. All right, I agreed, settling more comfortably in my chair. It began with what was supposed to be a 3-month assignment in Dubai. True to the senator's promise, the Crown Attorney's office called the next morning to inform us that Zain would be deported within 72 hours. The break-and-enter charges were being processed administratively, and the restraining order remained in effect until his removal from the country. By week's end, the immediate threat that had disrupted our lives would be gone. Sarah's relief was palpable, but tinged with a complexity of emotions that only those who have experienced betrayal can fully understand. I should feel closure, she confessed as we shared tea in my sunroom, morning light filtering through the curtains. Instead, I don't even know how to describe it. Unfinished. Unfinished, I supplied, recognizing the sensation from my own experiences, as if a chapter ended abruptly without a proper resolution. She nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Exactly, 6 months of my life, all those emotions and plans, and now it just evaporates with nothing real to show for it. Not nothing, I corrected gently. Experience is never nothing, Sarah. Even painful experience shapes us. Like your years in Dubai shaped you, she asked, our conversations increasingly circling back to my international career as she processed her own transformation. I smiled, acknowledging the parallel. In some ways, yes. Though my challenges were different, the principle is the same. We emerge from difficult periods either diminished or strengthened. And that choice is largely our own. Sarah considered this, the academic in her naturally drawn to analyzing patterns. You know what strikes me most about your Dubai stories? How you learn to use being underestimated as an advantage. All those men who assumed the Canadian woman couldn't possibly understand their sidebar conversations in Arabic. A lesson that served us well with Zain, I noted. Yes, but it's more than that. Sarah set down her mug, leaning forward earnestly. You never corrected people's assumptions about you. Even after you returned to Canada, you let everyone, including your own daughters, see only the surface. Widow, mother, comfortable retiree. The woman who could silence a room of Middle Eastern oil executives with a single, precisely worded observation in fluent Arabic was hidden away, like a secret identity. Her insight caught me off guard. I had never viewed my compartmentalization as a form of hiding, merely as a practical separation between chapters of my life. Yet Sarah's assessment carried an uncomfortable ring of truth. Perhaps I did, I acknowledged. When I returned after your father's death, it seemed simpler to step fully into the role everyone here expected of me. The international business executive didn't seem relevant to my life as a widow and mother in suburban Toronto. But she was always there, Sarah pressed. That version of you didn't disappear. She was just waiting for a moment of need. Like when your daughter brought home a charming con artist who assumed you were exactly what you appeared to be, I laughed softly at her framing. I suppose that's true. Though I never anticipated needing those particular skills in my retirement years. Our conversation paused as Emily arrived, letting herself in with her key and joining us with the brisk energy she brought to everything. Good news, she announced without preamble. U of T has officially rescinded Zain's doctoral candidacy. Turns out his research was even more fraudulent than initially suspected. They're sending formal notifications to his previous academic institutions. Academic death penalty, Sarah murmured, the phrase common in university circles for the ultimate professional disgrace. He won't easily recover from that. Nor should he, Emily replied pragmatically, helping herself to tea. Actions have consequences. Speaking of which, I ran into Detective Rivera at the courthouse this morning. She mentioned they found something interesting in Zain's apartment during the investigation. I raised an eyebrow, concerned about what new revelation might emerge. What kind of something? A dossier on our family, Emily said, her expression grim. Apparently, he'd been researching us extensively. Financial records, property holdings, even Mum's employment history. But here's the interesting part. The dossier had significant gaps and inaccuracies, particularly regarding Mum's time in Dubai. What kind of inaccuracies? Sarah asked. According to Rivera, his notes described Mum as having spent some time as a secretary or assistant in Dubai and being financially dependent on Dad's patents. He drastically underestimated both Mum's professional stature and her financial independence. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it. That explains a lot. He thought he was dealing with a helpless widow who wouldn't recognize his scheme. Instead, he got a former international executive who could understand his every word and see through his every move, Sarah completed, a hint of pride in her voice. The ultimate miscalculation. The three of us shared a moment of satisfaction at this final confirmation of Zane's fundamental error. He had assessed our family based on superficial assumptions and stereotypes, never bothering to look deeper. His failure to see me accurately had been his undoing. You know, Emily said thoughtfully, this whole ordeal has made me realize how little I actually knew about Mum's professional life. I mean, I knew you worked in oil and lived in Dubai, but I had no concept of your seniority or the scope of your responsibilities. That's partly my fault, I admitted. I never spoke much about that decade, especially after returning home. It seemed separate from our family life here. But it wasn't separate, Sarah pointed out. It was fundamental to who you are. Your skills, your perspectives, your ability to read people and situations. We just never saw that side of you in action until Zane forced it into the open. Well, I'm seeing it now, Emily said firmly. And frankly, it's a little intimidating to realize your mother could probably have been running a Fortune 500 company instead of attending your piano recitals. I reached over to squeeze her hand. I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I chose to do at each phase of my life. The executive career was fulfilling, but so was being present for you both after your father died. A comfortable silence settled between us, the morning sun strengthening as it rose higher. So much had changed in the weeks since Sarah's ill-fated dinner with Zane and his parents. Not just the external circumstances, the broken engagement, the legal proceedings, the impending deportation, but something more fundamental in how we related to each other. I'm going back to my condo tomorrow, Sarah announced suddenly. Emily helped me arrange for new locks and a security system, and I need to reclaim my space. I can't let what happened make me afraid of my own home. I studied her face, looking for signs of premature bravado, but found genuine determination instead. Are you sure you're ready? I think so, she replied. I've spent nearly a month processing everything, the betrayal, the manipulation, the invasion of privacy. Staying away any longer feels like letting Zane maintain power over my choices. That's remarkably healthy, Emily observed with slight surprise. I expected this recovery to take much longer. Sarah smiled, a genuine expression I had seen more frequently in recent days. I had good role models for resilience. She glanced meaningfully in my direction. Besides, I'm not the same person I was before this happened. None of us are. She was right, of course. Crisis has a way of stripping away pretense, revealing our true nature beneath social masks and comfortable roles. In exposing Zane's deception, we had inadvertently exposed truths about ourselves as well. My hidden strengths, Sarah's emerging resilience, Emily's fierce protective instincts. We had each stepped more fully into ourselves. I've been thinking, I said, making a spontaneous decision. Perhaps it's time I used my experience more actively. One of my former colleagues has been asking me to consult on international negotiations for women-owned businesses entering Middle Eastern markets. I've always declined, but maybe it's time to reconsider. My daughters exchanged surprised glances. Mom, that sounds perfect for you, Emily encouraged. Your experience would be invaluable. Are you sure you want to step back into that world? Sarah asked, more cautious. It's been years since you were actively involved in international business. I smiled, feeling a familiar energy I hadn't accessed in too long. Some skills never leave you. Besides, I think recent events have proven that my retirement might have been premature. I still have contributions to make. Looking at my daughters, both now seeing me clearly, perhaps for the first time, I realized that Zane's attempt to deceive us had inadvertently given us an unexpected gift: authenticity. In revealing who he truly was, he had compelled us to reveal our true selves to each other as well. To new beginnings, Emily proposed, raising her teacup in an impromptu toast. And to seeing clearly, Sarah added meaningfully, I raised my cup to join theirs, to truth, in all its languages. 6 months after Zane's deportation, life had settled into new patterns for all of us. Sarah had reclaimed her condo and her academic career, throwing herself into research with renewed focus. Emily had been promoted to senior partner at her law firm, her handling of Sarah's case having impressed the firm's leadership. And I had surprised myself by embracing a part-time consulting role that allowed me to use my international experience in meaningful ways. It was a crisp autumn evening when Sarah invited us to a faculty dinner at U of T. The department is hosting visiting scholars from the Middle East Studies program, she had explained. I thought you might enjoy the conversations, Mum, given your background. I accepted readily, pleased by how confidently Sarah had returned to professional and social engagements. The shadow of Zane's betrayal had faded significantly, though occasional moments of caution still surfaced in her interactions with new people. Emily joined us, arriving directly from court in an elegant suit that projected the authority she had grown increasingly comfortable claiming. As we entered the university's faculty club, the 3 Wilson women made a striking trio. Different generations and professions, united by an unmistakable family resemblance and shared resilience. The dinner was pleasant, with interesting discussions flowing around the table. I found myself engaged in conversation with a distinguished Jordanian professor about the economic development initiatives in the Gulf region, easily slipping back into the analytical mindset that had served me well during my executive years. Your insights into the region's business culture are remarkably nuanced, he commented. Most Canadians have a far more superficial understanding. I lived in Dubai for a decade, I explained, senior executive for Gulfstream Petroleum. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Ah, now I place you. Eleanor Wilson, you negotiated the joint venture agreement with Saudi Aramco in 2012. Quite the coup for a Canadian company at that time, especially with a woman leading the team. I smiled, pleasantly surprised to be remembered in professional circles after so many years. You have an excellent memory, Professor. The business community in the region is smaller than it appears, he replied. Your reputation was quite notable. Many were surprised when you left so suddenly. Family circumstances? I said simply, not elaborating on John's illness that had prompted my return to Canada. Life takes unexpected turns. As dinner concluded, and guests mingled over coffee, Sarah appeared at my elbow with a strange expression, part amusement, part discomfort. Mum, there's someone you should meet, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Professor Al-Fazel from the University of Jordan. He's just arrived and is asking about you specifically. Curious, I followed Sarah to where a distinguished man in his 60 seconds stood conversing with the department chair. When he turned to greet me, recognition was immediate and mutual. Mrs. Wilson, he said in Arabic, his tone reflecting genuine surprise. What an unexpected pleasure. Ambassador Al-Fazel, I replied in the same language, hiding my own surprise behind years of diplomatic practice. I didn't realize you had moved into academia. Sarah glanced between us, clearly sensing the undercurrent. You two know each other? Indeed, I confirmed, switching to English. His Excellency and I met during my time in Dubai. He was Jordan's ambassador to the UAE then, a position that allowed me to observe Mrs. Wilson's remarkable negotiating skills firsthand, he added smoothly. Though I believe the last time we spoke was under rather contentious circumstances. The diplomatic understatement nearly made me smile. Our final interaction had involved his attempt to pressure Gulfstream into accepting unfavorable terms on a pipeline project, countered by my presentation of evidence that certain Jordanian officials were receiving improper incentives from our competitors. Not exactly a pleasant conclusion to our professional relationship. Business is often contentious, Professor, I replied evenly, but that was many years ago. A flicker of something respect perhaps crossed his face. Indeed, much has changed, including, unfortunately, my country's handling of certain disgraceful individuals. The specific wording caught my attention immediately. Oh? I understand a former doctoral candidate from our university caused some difficulty for your family recently, he said, his tone carefully measured. A young man named Hakim. Sarah tensed beside me, but maintained her composure. "You're familiar with Zayn?" "With his family, primarily," Alphacel clarified. "The Hakims were once respected in Jordan, before Khalid's financial indiscretions. I was disturbed to learn their son had continued the family tradition of ethical flexibility here in Canada." The diplomatic phrasing couldn't disguise his evident disapproval. I studied him carefully, wondering about the purpose behind this seemingly casual conversation. "I assure you," he continued, addressing Sarah directly, "his behavior reflects poorly on him, not on Jordan or its people. We value honesty and hospitality as core cultural principles." "Of course," Sarah replied graciously. "I never assumed one individual represented an entire culture." Alphacel nodded, appearing satisfied with her response. "Mrs. Wilson, might I have a moment of your time? There's a professional matter I'd like to discuss." Curious, I excused myself from Sarah and followed him to a quieter corner of the room. Once we were relatively private, his demeanor shifted subtly, the academic persona giving way to the diplomat I had known years ago. "I'll be direct, Mrs. Wilson. The Hakim situation has created certain complications for Jordan's academic relationships with Canadian institutions. Zayn's fraudulent research and subsequent deportation have raised questions about our verification processes." "Understandably," I commented, wondering where this was heading. "Indeed. The university has implemented stricter protocols as a result." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "What you may not know is that upon his return to Jordan, young Hakim attempted to secure a position through family connections, claiming his departure from Canada was due to cultural discrimination." I raised an eyebrow, but remained silent, letting him continue. His narrative might have succeeded had certain information not reached the appropriate channels. Alphazel's gaze was meaningful. "Information regarding the true nature of his activities in North America, including his targeting of a senator's daughter and his attempt to access your family's financial resources through fraudulent means." Understanding dawned. "I see. And this information came through official diplomatic channels, I presume?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Let's say it came through channels that respected the truth over family connections. The Jordanian academic community values its international reputation too highly to allow such behavior to go unchallenged." What he wasn't saying directly, but was clearly implying, was that Zayn's attempt to rehabilitate his reputation in Jordan had been deliberately undermined by someone with knowledge of his actions in Canada, perhaps even Alphacel himself. "The academic world can be quite small," I observed neutrally. "As can diplomatic circles," he agreed. "Especially when they involve people who understand the importance of consequences for unethical actions." Our eyes met in mutual understanding. Whatever professional differences had marked our past interactions, we apparently shared a belief in accountability that transcended cultural and national boundaries. "I appreciate your discretion in handling this matter," I said carefully, "and your courtesy in informing me of the outcome." "Professional courtesy between colleagues," he replied with equal care. "Besides, I have always admired your attention to detail, Mrs. Wilson, even when it worked against my interests." As we rejoined the main gathering, Sarah approached with a questioning look. I squeezed her hand reassuringly, silently promising to explain later. The evening concluded pleasantly, with invitations extended and accepted for future academic collaborations. As we departed, Emily, who had observed the interaction with Alphazel from a distance, leaned close to ask, "What was that about? You two looked like you were conducting some kind of covert diplomatic mission." I smiled, appreciating her perceptiveness. "In a manner of speaking, we were. The world operates on connections and information, Emily. Sometimes justice takes unexpected paths." Later that night, as we shared a nightcap at my home, I explained Alphazel's revelations to my daughters. Sarah absorbed the news of Zayn's failed attempt to rewrite his narrative with thoughtful consideration. "So, he's facing consequences even in Jordan," she mused. "I'm not sure how to feel about that. Relieved, I suppose, that he can't simply start over with a clean slate and potentially harm someone else." "Actions echo," I replied, "sometimes across greater distances than we anticipate. Especially when helped along by former ambassadors with long memories," Emily added wryly. "Remind me never to get on your professional bad side, Mum. Apparently, you have international connections that can follow people across continents." I laughed at her exaggeration. I assure you, I had nothing to do with whatever information reached Jordan, though I can't say I'm displeased with the outcome. The three of us sat in comfortable silence, each reflecting on the unexpected epilogue to what we had considered a closed chapter. Eventually, Sarah spoke, her voice thoughtful. You know what strikes me as the greatest irony? Zane targeted me in part because he thought my family lacked the connections and knowledge to challenge him. He saw us as simple Canadians, a naive academic daughter and her widow mother, easy marks for his scheme. Instead, he got a family with more international savvy than he could have imagined, Emily completed. And a mother who understood every word he thought he was hiding behind a foreign language, I added. We raised our glasses in an impromptu toast, unified by the shared experience that had transformed us individually and collectively. What had begun as a painful deception had evolved into a catalyst for growth, revealing strengths we might otherwise have left dormant. As for Zane Hakim, wherever he was now, I hoped he had learned the lesson that transcends all languages and cultures. Appearances can be deceiving, especially when you're too arrogant to look beneath the surface. Thank you for listening. Please write a comment rating my story from 0 to 10. Subscribe and send it to someone who also likes to hear stories like this. Best regards,